Welcome back to DWeb Decoded, a podcast by Filecoin Foundation that explores the intersection of blockchain and the data economy. I'm your host, Aaron Stanley, and today we're continuing our series on decentralization and media. We're exploring how blockchain and new technologies are impacting the news industry and media more broadly. Today we have a super exciting guest. We're talking to Zach Guzman, who's founder of Coinage Media, crypto's first community-owned media platform. So Zach was previously an anchor and editor at Yahoo Finance and CNBC prior to becoming a crypto media entrepreneur. Zach, thanks for coming on the show.
Aaron, thank you so much for having me on, man. This is exciting.
Awesome. So here on DWeb Decoded over the last couple of months, we've been diving into this concept of decentralized media. And speaking frankly here, there probably aren't many people out there who exemplify this better than you do right now. So to get started, I'd love for you to tell us what you're building at Coinage and what was your inspiration for this?
Yeah, first off, thank you for saying that. I think it's been an experiment. We launched in 2022, so we've lived through some things in crypto, as anyone has who's been here that long. But really, this dates back all the way back to 2018 when I saw what was happening in crypto and saw how big it was becoming and thought, there should probably be a crypto show out there, like a show that is not just covering crypto, but actually using it in new ways. And so when I saw NFTs and what those made possible in terms of community ownership on the internet, that's kind of where the idea of Coinage reached its final form, which was, can you build a show or an outlet that breaks down the wall between a content creator and the people reading those articles or watching those videos to let them actually own and influence the production of everything. So that's what Coinage is. It's the first, as you said, community-owned outlet where people can mint an NFT, become an official legal member in our DAO cooperative, which is based here in the US. And then that entitles us to pay distributions back to active members via patronage dividends, which is cool because I think that's like the goal of what crypto unlocks, what Web3 unlocks, is this idea of community ownership online. And so that's what Coinage is in a nutshell. And we can talk more about kind of how that model has helped us grow faster than maybe Web 2 media models. But it's been super exciting.
Yeah, I love that. I've heard you talk a bit about, or at least in crypto, we talk a lot about this concept of read, write, own, right? I think your argument has been like, we need to rethink what we mean by own, right? This is sort of like the essence of Web3 is like owning your own, whether data or your own money or your whatever it might be. But your argument's been like, we need to kind of rethink this. We've maybe been getting it wrong up to this point. Maybe expand on that a bit. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think, I think that, to be fair, the people who got it wrong first might have been the way that traditional media was built, right? And that's the world I come from, as you said, as an anchor at Yahoo and CNBC. I've seen the decline of traditional media over the last few years. Like, trust in traditional media is at an all-time low. Like, those are the facts. Even though, as a journalist, journalists work really hard to like show that media should be trusted. It's like, it's difficult to do in this environment when like so many people call out the model of just like, are you prioritizing clicks? Are you prioritizing like clickbait? Who's really this for? And I think at Coinage, that's the interesting thing is that like we only serve our members, which again, anyone can mint an NFT to join and co-own us. And a lot of those people are the people who are consuming our content. And so we actually realigned incentives in a way where we can just serve the people who are coming to us for information. And, if they know more about the topic, they can actually tell us and be like, we should cover this or we should cover that. Because covering the space, like, this, Aaron, it moves so quick. It's like impossible to stay on top of. Like at Yahoo, I was like, man, it'd be really cool to have a decentralized newsroom that anyone can kind of come in and they might be an expert on stable coins or they might be an expert on like decentralized storage. And they could be the ones that are telling us what to do or what to cover or which projects are best. And so it's an experiment. I've never promised that like, hey, mint an NFT and you'll become a millionaire. Like that is certainly not what we say, but it is that you will become like a legitimate co-owner via a registered DAO cooperative that does enable real distributions to people. And I was super excited that we pioneered that in December. Coinage became the first NFT project to really do that. There are a couple other ones operating here in the US, but for us, we wanted to plant that flag that like ownership is not just pure speculation of like buy a thing and sell it at a higher price. It's like build community ownership together, realign incentives to help these things grow. And for Coinage, that's meant we've gotten a lot more eyeballs on us than we would have if we just pursued the Web 2 media model.
I love that. I have a lot of follow-up questions here. Maybe first, let's start off with just operationally. How does it actually work? How does one become a member of this cooperative and participate. How does one perhaps join into the community? Like, what would be the value for them to do so? Maybe aside from, like a token reward or a distribution, via royalties or whatnot.
Yeah, I guess I should back up and like think about like the experiment, because like of course Coinage isn't the only one that's doing this. Like we've seen the trend of independent media growing as traditional media has declined, right? The idea of like Patreon or all these different things, like having a Substack or whatever. But a lot of those things are built on just like passive viewership, no different than like kind of subscribing to a YouTube channel. Maybe you throw a like on there, and maybe you grow with the creator that way, but you don't really actually grow with the creator. You're just kind of like just being there and supporting them that way. And like what we're trying to pioneer is, okay, you can do that. And I think that's great. Like we have a subscriber tier that unlocks our content. That money goes into the DAO, and that's worked totally fine. But like what I think Web3 enables is this idea of like growing together. And so we have ownership tier NFTs where people can co-own us via a stake in what we're building. And as we grow our audience over time, we can charge more for ads. We can monetize different ways. And again, that becomes a larger kind of negotiating power as we have a larger audience. And so it's a win-win to kind of like grow with that creator over time. And we have had mostly, people who are in our DAO have been here for like 2 or 3 years, which is very rare for an NFT project, or meme coins, which we can get into, which is mostly like, hey, I want to get in and then I want to dump, I want to flip this thing. And like that, I don't think has been the most exciting thing about community in the era of Web3. Like I can give props to other projects like Constitution DAO. We can talk about those that like got me into this space because they showed you can have people come together on the internet to fund something and to grow it and to like show that this is possible in a way that like has not been possible for like the majority of the internet. And now here we are. And I think it's just a super exciting moment in time.
Yeah, you touched on an interesting point there in that a lot of these big kind of DAO projects or NFT projects from back in the previous cycle, like the 21-22 era, these were, a lot of these, like there's some really interesting proof of concepts in there with things like Bored Apes and like CryptoPunks and even like Constitution DAO. But a lot of these things were sort of flashes in the pan, right? There was, they were really good at bringing people together for a season, for a moment in time, right? People got really excited about wearing my Bored Ape, sweatshirt around, or my merchandise or whatever it might have been, or the Constitution DAO, which is a really incredible experiment, right? Where we're going to try to like just crowdfund money to buy this original copy of the Constitution. But then once the energy just sort of dissipates and just moves on to something else eventually, right? So a lot of these things that were really hot back in that day and that, 3-4 years ago, they're still around, but like people aren't really as excited about these. And it seems like the community has kind of, moved on to other things. But in your case, like these people that are in your community have stayed engaged over that period, it sounds. I'd love for you to maybe kind of just riff a bit more on that. Like what, obviously like your product is maybe a bit different than what like Bored Apes are doing, but like what is it that's the kind of the secret sauce here that's keeping folks engaged?
Yeah, well, I think the secret sauce is that like, we've seen, and I'll keep using Constitution DAO as an example because we just interviewed the co-founder, like kind of look back on like, what has changed since they launched that project in 2021? How different is community building now that we have meme coins kind of being like the topic du jour? And, I think one thing that is missed a lot of times, and like that was kind of the case with NFTs, is like, okay, you proved out scarcity just like Bitcoin did. You proved out this idea of like a collection that could be launched and like ownership and what that means to even have something in self-custody or in your own wallet. But there wasn't a lot of times like a shared cohesive narrative around like, what are we all doing here in this community? And like a lot of NFT projects struggle with that because it's like, hey, we all like this cartoon like monkey or this art collection, but like, is there anything for us to do together? And so like, with Coinage, it's been interesting because like we've attracted a community of people who like understand Web3 and want to see it succeed. We've seen like people who believe in this tech come together who want to steer like the narrative in crypto, right? In terms of like, what is crypto? What is important to cover in crypto? What should we use our platform to like get eyes on? Because that's like really the most powerful thing at the end of the day. Like that's what traditional media was all about until it started to get distrusted, until like people started calling them out for not delivering facts. And so what we're trying to pioneer is just like a cool new way to like re-incentivize and set up a new incentive structure around that to where like we don't stand to benefit if we aren't reporting things that like our members believe is true, or tell us is not true, because everyone can kind of use their NFTs to vote on our coverage, which guests to have on, which shows are good. We also did this thing called Crypto Project of the Year, where our NFT project or our NFT holders can actually vote and tell us who Coinage should crown as our Crypto Project of the Year, which Solana was just the latest winner off of their huge run up. And it's exciting. I mean, like, I think that is what has people stick around. And I don't want to hype the patronage dividend too much, but it's not too crazy to squint your eyes and think about, like, okay, what are we doing when we're staking an NFT or staking our coins to like get an award down the line? It's like, it's keeping you around. And the dividend model for like a lot of stocks or a lot of companies out there has existed for a really long time because it keeps you invested in a sense, right? And like in Web3, that could mean attention or that could mean money. And like really for what Coinage is doing is we're trying to do a little bit of both in terms of like, how do you value things on the internet? It's like your time and where you want to put kind of your attention. And so I think that's like the other interesting thing in terms of building is like, you don't really just need to worry about kind of finances anymore. We're seeing now where like attention can be monetized in very different ways. And as a media company, that is super exciting to throw ourselves into the arena and now monetize in different ways.
And yeah, and speaking of that, you just hit 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is pretty impressive. So congratulations on that. And maybe talk a bit about like, you know, how you've been able to achieve that growth in such a quick amount of time. Maybe vis-a-vis maybe like kind of, you know, traditional media company models, I guess, that are operating in crypto. And looks like you're doing some interesting, you have some fun, you know, things that you've done to celebrate the 100,000. Was it like the silver award or silver bullet award or whatever that the YouTubers give out. So tell us about that.
Whenever you cross, it's a cool thing that YouTube does. And like, you know, a lot of creators who have crossed 100,000 subscribers have like put together videos on like that moment when they unbox this silver play button that YouTube sends to people. And it's, you know, it's a powerful moment in a creator's life. And for us, like as a community-owned outlet, it was powerful for me, but like I don't actually own it because it's the Coinage DAOs. And so we thought, like, how do we share this moment with our existing community? And one idea was to tokenize it, right? In terms of launching a meme coin, like that's our moment, that's our meme, was this play button that we won. And so we launched play button, the meme coin, on Solana, actually, to kind of give our community the opportunity to like participate in this moment with us. And also just like kind of extend Coinage, because again, we're a Web3 media outlet. Our NFTs are on Ethereum, but we're not in any means an Ethereum-backed show. We've never taken it. Like all the money for Coinage has come from people around the internet who have wanted to mint. The money goes into the DAO, and that's the way that we're funded. And so we're kind of a unique media outlet in that sense, in that like we legitimately are like beholden to no one. And so when we saw Solana pop up and our NFT holders on ETH voted for Solana as Crypto Project of the Year, it made sense to kind of launch over there. And so we launched this coin. It's been a very fun experiment. It's fresh. It's new. It actually attracted, you know, the most money for a Solana fair launch. We tried to emulate what Constitution DAO did, to where everyone could kind of get in on the same price and then launch together. And we were learning some new things. Part of this, Aaron, is throwing ourselves into the arena and seeing how the sausage is made and covering it from like a journalistic perspective. And it's been very exciting to kind of let our community into that world and peel back the curtain a little bit rather than the rug out from under them, because I haven't sold, Coinage isn't sold. This is very much an experiment. But yeah, it's been cool, man, because again, that's not something anyone can buy. You cannot buy a YouTube play button. And so this experiment is kind of like, okay, if we have something that technically has a price of zero, but has a value above that, like, could this be the exact opposite of what most meme coins do, which is trend towards zero? Can we start like relatively pretty low, and that's where we're at? And can we like grow something over time using attention?
Yeah, and it's the play button is a really great example of something that maybe there's not like a monetary value. You can't buy it, you can't like resell it, but there's still an intrinsic value to it, right? This is like, hey, this isn't something we accomplished as a community together. Like, you know, how can we, you know, like I want to be able to, as a community member, I want to be able to participate in this, even though I can't necessarily like own the physical thing. So I think it's a really great experiment of you know, trying to like tokenize this attention, tokenize this like kind of this intrinsic value that this thing has, even though I can't just like, you know, chop it up and distribute it to people, right? But I can, but as an owner, I could at least, or as a community member, I could at least have a stake in this thing somehow. So I love that idea, and I love how you're just kind of throwing yourself into the mix as well. Just like, let's figure this out as we go. I'd like for you to maybe talk a bit more about like how has it like impacted your understanding of the industry as like a journalist, like kind of looking, because you started as more of, kind of on the TradFi side, right? As Yahoo Finance, CNBC, you're kind of looking at crypto like it's this, it's like going to the zoo, right? Like you go to the zoo, like, ooh, look at the animals, right? Look at these exotic species, right? And then you kind of get a bit more immersed into it and like, oh, this is pretty interesting, right? And you're trying to understand it. And then maybe how has it helped you like just better understand how this world works now that you're actually like deploying and like using some of these technologies and some of these concepts firsthand?
Yeah, I know. It's a great question. I think it's been exciting too to think about these things. You got me thinking with the zoo analogy to our interview with Do Kwon after Terra collapsed. That was like the first thing that we did, put Coinage on the map. And that was our first experiment. It was like, okay, we have this super huge exclusive. Everybody wanted to get that interview. Everyone wanted to know like what really happened with Terra. I lost a lot of money. A lot of people lost a lot of money, and he hadn't talked about it. And so we did that interview and we launched it. And the way that we launched it was we were always going to put it out on YouTube because we're trying to grow our platforms. And again, they're kind of like more top of funnel. But the question was like, well, should we put this out first to where people could mint an NFT to watch it first? And like, we didn't charge anyone for it, but it was an interesting experiment to see like, okay, who's our core audience? Can we attract those eyeballs on chain and bring them into our community? And then slowly over time, like raise the price of that subscription NFT to our content as we grow this channel and put out more content that they can watch. Like when we're starting, no one wants to pay a subscription. Like you wouldn't pay $9 for Apple TV if they had no shows. And we were just starting out. And so we saw the value in actually like not charging anybody, but we would give them the opportunity to mint an NFT to watch the content and then from there raise the price. And so that was an interesting way to kind of like put out an exclusive and show what you can do on chain. And I think, as a journalist, I come from kind of just the content world and I understand like kind of good stories attract people and attention. But like diving into this world, in that interview, Do Kwon said, like, the market is a jungle. And like sometimes you build these things with good intentions, they're out in the world, and then someone manipulates things. And like certainly we've seen that in meme coins. But now, like as we're here building this, you really do like have pieces, like all crypto is technology, right? And it's like, what do you want to do with it? And so like coming from the traditional media world, it's been really fun to kind of like rethink again. My background actually before journalism in college was like behavioral economics. And so like, can you re-incentivize certain things using crypto and tokens and community building to like reformat traditional business? And we saw that with Bitcoin, right? Like it was the first one that revolutionized finance in like, hey, the more you use the network, the more value accrues to Bitcoin holders. And so like money on the internet became the thing that showed you can accrue value to like users. But I thought at the time, like, this is going to revolutionize, like this technology is going to revolutionize every sector, not just finance, media, and anywhere there's like gatekeeping. And in no sector is perhaps there more gatekeeping than like entertainment. Like look at Hollywood. And so we've seen a lot of experiments pop up of like helping creators like find additional funding models, right? Like Angel Studios is an example of like people kind of more on the right trying to fund creators creating content that's more conservative. And like our model is really just like letting any creator take their idea and run with it by like monetizing it with their fans in a way that I think serves the creator better. And so like the co-founder of Netflix is one of our backers. We can talk a little bit more about that. But like the idea of doing this is, again, using the technology to create more fair outcomes for creators and their fans to like help them create something together. And I think as a creator myself, that's like the real power of this.
And I think it's interesting because it's like the next evolution, as you alluded to earlier, of this kind of like the Substackization of like independent media where, or it's like, okay, I can easily, I can create this content, I can distribute pretty easily, and then I can ask people to subscribe to it. I can generate some revenue for myself that way. Or like a Patreon, type of thing where it's more of just like a donation. You kind of like, it's like, begging and pleading, like, if you like this content, please, send me some money because, I got to feed my family, whatever. And I think, what we've learned over the past couple of years, ever since kind of the Substack wave took off in maybe like 2020, 2021-ish, when like all of a sudden everybody had their own newsletters and things, is that this isn't really like, there's a place for this stuff, but it's not really like a viable, like it's very difficult to actually like make a living doing this type of thing as an independent journalist, like unless you're like a Glenn Greenwald or something, or a Barry Weiss or one of these types of people with already a very large personal brand. And I think like the other side on like the Patreon side, it's really more, you're just kind of relying on people's generosity, right? And you have to kind of pass the collection plate around, essentially trying to, kind of beg for scraps from people. And it ends up being like kind of a one-way street, right? It's like I produce content, you watch it, and you pay me, and then that's kind of it, right? Where it feels like you've kind of hit, this, like I'm getting, if I'm a member of Coinage, I'm getting more than just interesting content. Like I'm getting to be a part of the community. I'm getting kind of the ability to have a say in what's going on. I'm getting, I can presumably I can like build relationships with other people who are like vested members of the community who have similar interests. And maybe talk a bit more about that. Like, how is this kind of like, how have you kind of moved the needle on like just like the basic like, kind of Substack model? Like, what have you learned from this?
Well, I think that that's the big thing is that like if you think about the evolution of this, right? And I'll go back to like Web 2 and what Web 2 is really good at is like Web 2 is really good at letting a creator amass a huge following. Like look at Instagram, look at TikTok. Like that's what they were good at, right? But you're bringing together people that have a shared interest, right? Like if you're a food content creator and you're putting out food content, you're attracting a lot of people who like really love food. And so you have this massive following, but no way to like actually interact with them. And like even Instagram knows that they've like, okay, we need to do broadcast channel. We need to like do some more like tooling around that. And like what Web3 unlocks is like you can break down the wall between a content creator and their fans. So like to your point, like structure community around it. And like that community effect is like incredibly powerful. And like there is like, how do you tokenize that and like extract the value essentially is the idea. And like, who does the value go to? And normally it goes to platforms, right? And like creators get like a cut, like your YouTube revenue is like pennies on the dollar. But like, why is that? Like, why does it not go back to the creator 100%, like a dollar for dollar, if this is what they're creating? And so I think it becomes a very fascinating experiment because there's a positive flywheel effect that happens if you let your followers like co-own something with you. And I'll give you an example because like I come from Yahoo and like I had a bunch of colleagues that also went the independent media route and like they're doing great work. But like, again, we hit this like milestone of this play button because I think instead of just going the Patreon model of like, to your point, letting people like passively subscribe, what we've done is create a passive subscriber into a co-owner, which means they're more incentivized to share the content. They're more incentivized to tell people about it because like they're invested in this in a way that you're not if you're just like kind of one-way street paying a creator. And so I think it's inevitable in the same way that like Bitcoin proved hard money and attracted a lot of money into it because the value accrued to the people who actually use the network. Same thing is what we're trying to do on the content creation side of like the value accrues to the creator and the fans that are helping support and kickstart this and get it off the ground because they're buying into it. So it's like Bitcoiner's hard money on the internet. Like what we're trying to build at Coinage and Trustless, my startup that's like kind of incubating these projects, is building like hard, I don't know, fanhood on the internet, if you want to call it that.
Nice. I love that. And I love the, I mean, if there's one thing we've learned from like the Web 2 model, it's really just that, even if looking at something like OnlyFans, which is obviously maybe a bit of an edge case example here because, a different type of content altogether, but like people really do like want these, like people want that relationship with the content creator, right? It's like something that people are craving, right? They really want that. They want that ability to kind of, and not just with that creator, but I also want to connect with like other people that also follow that creator. And I want, because that's going to add a lot of value for me in a lot of different ways. And that's just not something that I think the kind of the Web 2 model just doesn't really like offer that in a meaningful sense right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a good example too, though, because it's like, not every creator might want to show off their naughty bits. And like for journalists, certainly it's like we're trying to do, and journalism has been like really hard to monetize, but it's like it serves a purpose, right? It's like truth and information on the internet need to be protected and need to be monetized. And it's like, okay, how do you like structure these things in the same way? Like you said, like people want access to something. And so like, okay, then you need new ways to monetize what you're putting out. And I think that like, that's what's been really fun as a journalist to like see this work is that like, okay, you can monetize things that aren't just, showing naughty bits, but like actually what serves like a purpose. And I think that is again, refreshing because like the old model was kind of selling journalists out in terms of like undermining the integrity of their reporting because people like Elon Musk can say, this outlet's just biased or like, I don't believe you because your model is all based on clicks. It like kind of undermines the good work that journalists do. But at the same time, again, as crypto's proven, like trust but verify or like, how do you provably show you're unbiased? It's kind of where the idea for Coinage came about is like, can we attract people from different tribes on the internet of like they're all interested in crypto, but they might have like this bias because they own a bunch of Solana or like ETH. And now we're just kind of sitting there with a community that's come from everywhere, allowing us like to learn from them and just land on objective fact that helps everybody. And so like, I think it's an experiment, but I think it's set up in a way that can help positive outcomes for everybody.
Do you think that this is maybe like a viable kind of third way business model for media at this moment? Like if you think of the kind of the media business model right now is sort of, you're either kind of doing kind of like outrage content, just trying to, farm impressions and clickbait, that kind of stuff, and then use that to generate, ad revenue, or you're owned by like a billionaire tycoon who sort of subsidizes the operation. I mean, do you think this is what you've discovered here? Is this like kind of like a prototype for like what media could look like or what the news business, the media industry could look like in like 10 years? Would you say maybe this is more of like, this could be like the next version of kind of like a trade publication where you have like a really, maybe it's not, you're not going to get like millions and millions of followers, but like you kind of have like this loyal base of just of readers who just really find this content relevant to them and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I to be honest with you, I don't know necessarily which direction it goes, because like if you think about it, some of these influencers have like larger followings than even some of like the traditional media outlets did 10 years ago, right? And so it's kind of like, who's the real like point of truth, right? It's like if people are getting their news from TikTok influencers more so than like actually reading the New York Times, like over time that becomes the news. And that's kind of, I don't know if that's scary or not, but it is interesting to think about. And so I think kind of, if you want to defend objectivity, which is like what journalists always fight for, then like you need a new incentive structure around it or a new way to monetize, right? And I think, obviously we've launched other things. So Coinage is just our proof of concept. We have a food show called Best Dish Ever launched on Avalanche, and similar concept of letting food creators own the content with their fans. And we're talking to other creators to do the same thing in their respective media niches. But again, I think that model scales much better. And so, I do think it's a better outcome than maybe, again, being deplatformed, right? By like a platform that doesn't like your content or doesn't agree with what you're saying. Or to your point, like having a billionaire who's funded you the whole time, like you need to be beholden to that and steps in and like messes everything up, as we're seeing kind of like with the Washington Post and Jeff Bezos right now, regardless of like which side of the aisle you're on or like whatever your political views are. It's like the idea of some outside force changing truth based on what they want rather than like what your audience or the creator wants, like is a misalignment of incentives. And so I think that this model is, again, a very interesting way to not just like kind of create realignment, but also monetize, as we've seen with Coinage's NFTs that people have minted and now steadied. Like, how many NFT projects can say they've grown sustainably over 3 years? Like, not a lot. And so I think that just kind of shows like where the value accrual is happening. It's like back to NFT holders, and as a co-op, that's the way that it should be.
I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit to close out. This is something I was thinking about quite a bit as I was preparing for this. And, with a lot of the just successful crypto projects in general, they've kind of started revolving around something of like a cult of like almost like a cult of personality around like a single person. And they've kind of like decentralized out from there. So like Bitcoin is Satoshi Nakamoto, Vitalik with Ethereum, et cetera, et cetera. And like, and you're yourself, I mean, you're not like a mega celebrity necessarily, but you're a reasonably well-known, personal brand. And like, how much of this is maybe like attributable of the success that you've had is maybe attributable to like your kind of personal brand and like people kind of coalescing around that versus maybe like the idea of like a decentralized media concept? And then maybe like the corollary question of that would be like, kind of like the hit by the bus test, right? Like Vitalik gets hit by a bus, like will Ethereum continue to exist? Probably. Like if Zach Guzman gets hit by a bus, like not calling that to happen, but like what happens to Coinage Media? Like if like you're not the face of it anymore?
No, it's a really good question. And I think, it's one that I think about, not necessarily the getting hit by a bus part, but I do think about like the idea of like, are we growing something that's bigger than me? And that is legitimately the goal. And it is cool to see more than like 6,500 NFT holders now on Coinage. Like, when we started, I didn't know where this was going to go. And 3 years later, now we're here as like one of the fastest growing media outlets with a community of co-owners that like are voting on things. We've paid the first distribution to members. Like all of this is working in a way that like I thought we'd get here. I didn't know how quickly. I didn't know if it'd take 3 years, but we're there now. And like similarly, like think about like the Daily Show, right? With Jon Stewart, like he built that show into what it was and then left, and you saw a bunch of people come in after him, and like it still was what it was, and eventually came back. And like, I think with Coinage, like that's kind of the cool thing is like we've built a brand. The DAO owns all the IP, right? And so like think about where that can go. Like we're just doing things in the US. But as we've seen with like other experiments, like I don't know, we're chatting with Story candidly. Like what can you do if you leverage the IP? Can there be a Coinage Argentina? Can there be a Coinage doing like Spanish content? Can there be a Coinage in Hong Kong doing stuff over there? Like there's so many opportunities. And like I really do think that like part of what I respect so much about Web3 and people in Web3 is that like you're building in public transparently. And so, like, to answer your question, I don't know how much. Like, you're right. I'm not a huge celebrity at all. I had a platform, and I knew I could monetize. And so, like, when we raised money to start Trustless, we started with a crypto show because of my contacts, and I knew I could get interviews and produce content that was going to be good to show this proof of concept. And so, like, that's what we bet on. I bet on myself. But now, as I said, we've grown it with other creators and doing their own thing because I think the smartest thing you can do in media, coming from that world, see a lot of problems where like management gets involved, they get in the way, there's like intermediaries. And like Web3 is all about disintermediation, like Bitcoin taking like the banks out and like just have money online. Same thing with like content. It's like you can do this much more efficiently now. Like you don't need all the middle steps in content and everything like that. So like I think it's a cool model. I'm not necessarily like the only person this benefits, and I don't need to be the face of Coinage for forever. And I don't want to be candid, Aaron. It's not like I don't love it completely. But I'm here and I'm serving the purpose. And like, until the DAO votes me out or wants me out, like, you know, I'm going to keep cranking and by the power from my cold dead hands, I hope that like Web3 can fix all the problems in media. And that's what we're trying to pioneer.
Very cool. Very cool. Very inspiring work you're doing. This is super interesting. And I really think you've you know, maybe stumbled upon isn't the right word because you've obviously like had a vision for this thing, but like I think you have, you know, a prototype of something that is going to become much more common here over the coming years. So it seems like, you know, feels like you figured out how to do this, at least in a you know, a microcosm way, right? So I'm really interested to see like how much can this scale, like how much will there be like other you know, other folks that kind of, you know, come and kind of copy paste what you're doing and just apply it for their particular niche or vertical. But super interesting stuff. And I guess one last question I wanted to, you mentioned that you had the co-founder of Netflix as one of your investors. And I was just wondering, I would love you to maybe talk about what's his particular like interest in this area, but also like when you were going around trying to raise money for this initially, like what was the pitch? I mean, this is something that really like never, I mean, NFTs were a thing, but this idea of like a NFT, you know, a gated media platform, like I don't like this had never really been floated before. Like, what was the reception? What was the reception to that?
Yeah, I was surprised because Mark Randolph, the co-founder of Netflix, I didn't know that he was like a Web3 guy, but he had already minted things. And so like when I came to him about Coinage, it was like, hey, can you like support us and like mint this? Like we're trying to do like a decentralized media. He's like, yeah, for sure. And like I didn't need to walk him through like how to mint. He just knew how to do it. I was like, oh wow. And he was like in NFT communities. And so I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. But then we started talking more about like, you know, he had come on my show around Yahoo when I was still anchor over there. And like he wrote a great book called That Will Never Work that kind of shows like the entrepreneurial journey of Netflix. And it's all about like, you know, Mark was integral in like the idea of like, how do we revolutionize and take on Blockbuster? And like, that was like rental fee, like everything about it was just, again, misaligned incentive structure of like, this is a bad outcome for the customers of Blockbuster. And so like Netflix, they saw the vision of like where they could go, but they started with DVDs in the mail. And like that again was like a piece of technology that was introduced that made a business model that was never possible before. You could just send like a DVD in the mail because like VHSs were too big or like just too like it wasn't gonna work. And so like all of a sudden you could send a DVD in the mail for like nothing. And so it enabled like the technology enabled a business model. And like the long-term vision wasn't necessarily like what Mark, like eventually Reed took over and became like a huge studio, but like it started with technology that enabled the next step. And like I look at like what we're doing, and I think where Mark kind of like got involved and like, you know, Mashable wrote up our co-interview together before. But like I think what he sees is like similarly, like what we're trying to do is like if you could build a Netflix with Web3 tech, like what would that look like? And the idea is like instead of starting with a platform, which a lot of people do, and a lot of VCs, if VCs are listening, like a lot of VCs love funding platforms because that's the way Web 2 worked. But like if you could redo it now with Web 3, having these like tokenized communities between a content creator and their fans, like suddenly bundling those together presents a huge opportunity for like what we're trying to do at Trustless. And so like I think he wanted to get involved that way because he sees kind of, again, long-term vision, short-term vision. How can technology like disrupt that? And like, with Filecoin and like the decentralized idea of like storage and everything, like that's another thing that like that's one area where I was hoping we'd be a little bit farther with like wallets being integrated. So like I can have content directly go via the NFT to a wallet and don't even need to worry about like a YouTube or things like that or our own site. And so like that's taken a little bit longer than I thought it would when we started, but I still think that that's kind of eventually like where this whole industry goes. And again, allowing a content creator to have a more direct relationship with their fans. And I think that's why Mark got involved, and who knows, maybe I'm a good salesman, maybe I'm not. Maybe I don't give myself enough credit, but like it's been exciting to have him on board, and I love Mark for that.
No, that's super interesting. And yeah, a lot of interesting parallels like coming from, like Netflix is just like kind of the classic, like almost like the Harvard Business School case study of, disrupting, how do you disrupt just an antiquated business model technology, like the Blockbuster, video business model. And so having somebody who was kind of at the forefront of that, like 20, 25 years ago, now thinking along the lines of kind of community owned media and like integrating, kind of a Web3 native media platform. It's a nice verification. It's a nice like kind of endorsement at the very least. Right. So, anyway, Zach, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on the show and just learning about Coinage and your journey. I'll leave it over to you if you have any final thoughts, and then how can folks learn more about yourself and Coinage?
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me come on. There's not a lot of platforms. Like as we're doing this, not a lot of media really cares to cover what we're trying to do because it's kind of challenging what they're doing. So I appreciate the platform. If anyone wants to get involved, they can head to Coinage.media where all of our content lives. We just had SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce on the show. And they can get involved that way. They can mint an NFT, either unlock the content or co-own what we're building with us. And hopefully you do. If you're into Web3, I think it's a very simple and easy to understand example of read, write, own, read, watch, own on the internet.
Amazing. Well, thanks again, Zach. And thanks again for everyone for watching. And we will see you next time on DWeb Decoded.
Thanks, Aaron.